Hey everyone, this is Travis Burton with the Kentucky Chamber. We appreciate you being with us today. We're going to give everyone just a moment to get logged in, and then we will get rolling. I see the number of people joining us is still growing, so we still have a few folks getting online, but just to be mindful of time for everyone, I'll go ahead and welcome you to the and KCTCS's Restart Kentucky webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about local government. We've all been following what's happening at the state level. Deep dive on how our local governments are dealing with the ongoing pandemic, what they've been up to, and what they see coming in the next few months as Kentucky begins to reopen its economy and get back to work. Again, I'm Travis with the Kentucky Chamber, and I want to welcome you to our webinar on how local governments are dealing with the pandemic. With that, and I'm going to hand things over, but we have Linda Gorton, the mayor of Lexington. We have Jim Henderson, executive director and CEO of the Kentucky Association of Counties. We have Alan Keck, the mayor of Somerset. We have, who just joined us, Mike Buchanan, the judge executive of county. And today's panel, also participating in the panel and leading the discussion, will be J.D. Cheney, the executive director and CEO of the Kentucky League of Cities. So I'm going to hand things over to J.D. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you, Travis. Appreciate it. Appreciate the chamber bring together such a very distinguished panel of people that I know very well. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue with how our local governments are responding. Most of these people I talk to pretty frequently. I think Jim and I now have each other on speed dial, working city and county issues together. Mayor Gorton has a very important obligation. She's only going to be able to be with us for the first half hour, so we may lean heavily on Mayor Gorton at the start, since she'll have to depart about halfway through. But I'm going to get right into the questions that the attendees have submitted and want to hear about from a local government perspective. There hasn't been a lot of media attention or on, at least statewide, on the struggles of local government in dealing with this. And besides the healthcare industry workers, our city and county employees are on the front line of dealing with this pandemic every single day. So the local government response to this has been critical in the partnership with the state in terms of our response and the mitigation as it goes forward. So I'm going to throw out the first question, and Mayor Gorton, we'll start with you and try to get the rest of the panelists questions. But just generally talk about how your community is dealing with the virus, and whether or not you think your constituents are ready for these phase 1 and phase 2 reopenings as the governor has announced.
Thank you so much. And I want to first thank the Chamber for inviting me to be with this distinguished panel. I would say that the past 2 months have been unbelievably difficult in many different ways. And we were talking kind of off the air, Mayor Keck and I, about how the last 2 months feel like 2 years in some ways. And early on, you know, I come from my profession was as a registered nurse. So I come from a healthcare perspective. So early on, when the governor announced the very first death, I almost immediately, within 3 days, closed our jail, our senior center, and our nursing homes before the state closed them, because I knew that grouping of people would be a critical place where this virus could spread. But our citizens have really done a great job flattening the curve here in Lexington, and they've taken this very seriously. It's been, we have a great partnership right now with our local chamber, Commerce Lexington, our tourism bureau, and leaders in the community who are working on my mayor's COVID response committee. We're putting together a blueprint, and I'm co-chairing it with Luther Deaton, who's the president and CEO of Central Bank. It is broken into 16 subcommittees, and we're going to send our plan to the governor this weekend. So, this is impacted, and others will talk about this, our budgets in a horrendous way. It's sudden impact. In Lexington, you all know, if you keep up with the news, we have projected a $40 million downturn in our revenues next year. And that's pretty difficult. And, but I would just say that constituents and businesses are ready to go into, they're ready for phase 1 and 2 in a measured way. I hear a lot of people say, I'm not going out to eat yet. So it's, we get all kinds of responses to that, but we're making plans for people to be safe.
How about you, Judge Buchanan, in Warren County?
Well, we did many of the same things that the mayor did in Lexington. We closed our jail right away, our senior centers, and our nursing homes have really gone the extra mile to make sure that they're protected. However, we have had some nursing homes in the general area who have not been as lucky as the Bowling Green nursing homes. We've been in the news quite a bit for an uptick in our positive cases, and certainly that has been the case. But let me also say that I prepared the people here 6 weeks ago for the fact that we were going to have a big increase in positive cases as soon as we started doing making tests more accessible to the public. And for the past 3 weeks, we have tested more than just about any other county in the state. And unfortunately, it's showing up in our numbers. But I'm not saying the numbers aren't real, because they are. But I believe every county and across the state, it has the same number or the same percentage of or similar percentages of COVID in their counties, but they simply haven't gotten them tested and understand who they are. The COVID-19 doesn't really understand county lines, and it really is showing up across the county. We haven't cut off, we haven't laid off anyone actually in county government. We've continued to serve the public from the courthouse. We've closed all of our buildings, not public, but we have kept our employees working. Those who have very little to do in their respective areas, like parks and recreation programming, we've repurposed, and they have done an extraordinary job of food distribution and a lot of community services that have been beneficial to the public. So we've kept them all busy, and certainly we're expecting a huge downturn in our revenues for next year, and our budget will reflect that, but nowhere near the level that Lexington is going to have. Our budget isn't nearly as big, nor are we as dependent on occupational tax and income tax as they are.
Eric Keck in Somerset, how's your response? And in particular, what about your constituents and businesses? Are they ready for the reopening?
Yeah, they certainly are. I'd like to just say thanks for the opportunity. I never thought 2 or 3 months ago I'd be sitting in my car with you folks doing a webinar, but that's the world we live in now. And I'm grateful to be here. But, we're in a little different situation where we're in a more rural area. And, we haven't been as drastically affected in our county. We've had fewer than 50 cases total. For several days last week, we had 0 active cases. And as I speak today, I think we have 2. And so We're also a part of the state, JD, that is so dependent on tourism. And, you know, for us, it's critical that, as Mayor Gorton said, we do have this manageable sort of systematic reopening. And I was thrilled. We had launched a proposal on behalf of our constituents and local businesses to get restaurants back open a little quicker than was originally scheduled. And I'm pleased that's happened. Leveraging this Memorial Day is critical for several of our businesses. And I mentioned yesterday in a small speech that I've started to see business closings all over the Commonwealth, and we have several in Somerset. And my concern for their livelihoods is growing by the day. This unquestionably is not a short-term problem, yet something that I think is going to stick with us for some time. And the courage we show in the next weeks and months ahead to get folks back to work in a safe way is absolutely vital. And, you know, the folks in Somerset are chomping at the bit. They're looking forward to it, and I think they're ready to do so in a safe way.
Yeah, and Mayor Gorton, Jim, maybe a couple different perspectives. I don't want to feed into this narrative of a urban-rural divide in Kentucky, because I don't think one exists to that great of extreme as perhaps what we see nationally. But, you know, with your counties, Jim, do you see any difference between the needs and the responses by the more populous counties and cities versus the lesser populated communities? Are their needs different?
You know, this is the one thing, and I think to Mike or Judge Buchanan, sorry, Judge, we've been friends for 20 plus years, so I forget to, but as he said, I mean, this thing doesn't know county boundaries. It really doesn't even know geography. The interesting part, and when I say this thing, I don't mean just the virus. I mean all of the various things that have gone with it. It's really kind of intriguing that if you saw some information maybe a couple weeks ago about the counties nationally that would be most adversely affected by this economically, you know, there were 2 counties in Kentucky that were on that list. And my first thought is, okay, we've got some counties that always show up on lists of economically depressed, you know, counties or jurisdictions, but it was not those counties. It was a couple of our much more prosperous growing counties. So the reality is, again, to Mayor Gorton and Judge Buchanan and even Mayor Keck in some respects there at Somerset, you've got areas that are part of a growing part of the state that are probably more adversely affected, especially on the economic side, than maybe counties that are fairly middle of the road. I mean, if you're a primarily property tax dependent county, you're not going to see a major fluctuation in that, at least not initially. And so it's kind of the adage, the bigger you are, the harder you fall with some of our counties. So there is differences, but it's different also dependent upon the structure of the county, obviously, and this will be a conversation for another webinar, but in counties where you have the offsets on the taxes and things, it may not have as much impact on payroll tax for the county in that county, but obviously in a county that's under 30,000, it's a big issue because the overall payroll is down in almost any county when you get to the job piece. So it's really been all over the board. The response has been very different in different counties based on you know, the caseload. But again, to Judge Buchanan's point, it's everywhere. It's everywhere fairly nationally. It's just if you don't test more, you won't know it's there more. I saw a list this morning of maybe 7 or 8 counties in Kentucky that haven't had a case yet, and they're in primarily rural counties, primarily in the east. But there's no reason to believe there aren't positive cases there. It's just that maybe the testing has been less or what have you. So yeah, the challenges have really not been along the urban-rural divide as the way you might even think, as the conventional wisdom might make you think rural small counties would really be taking it harder. I mean, it's certainly hard on every county and cities in those counties. But again, it's not necessarily worse for a rural county right now.
Sometimes I think people forget the fact that local governments are employers and major employers in many instances. And you all lead a substantial workforce in each of your all's communities. How are you all preparing your all's workforces for the changes that are coming from the governor in terms of phasing back in and looking at reopening government buildings for in-person service? Throw in your comments about these new way of doing meetings as well. I've been proud of the response from local officials. As you all know, our demographic sometimes is a little more veteran in nature, and the reluctance to embrace technology in some cases has been there. But you're conducting meetings via Facebook and Zoom and meetings and audio conferences. How have you prepared your workforce, and what's your plan for going forward to ease their fears to get them back going? Mayor Gorton.
Well, our workforce here in Lexington Fayette Urban County government is 3,000 employees, full-time employees. And we, in the beginning, we did not have the capability to have a lot of our employees teleworking. And so we quickly worked on that to where we had, 1,500 of our employees are first line police, fire, corrections, people out there who can't telework. But beyond that, we have about 1,500 who could, if possible, and we ramped up to get 700 of our employees teleworking. And we are continuing right now to have as many as possible teleworking. We've been closed to the public this entire time, and we do not plan to open to the public anytime soon because we have made provisions for anything that the public needs to come in and pay or do with such as filing plans or anything like that. They can do that from a distance now. And we have worked real hard on protecting our waste workers. We have quite a few waste workers who were having to pick up things, and so we've worked on getting them PPE through this whole thing as well as everybody else. So right now we're focused on getting prepared to bring employees back when that day comes with masks and PPE, and how we'll actually work doing the temperatures. We've been looking at some really good plans that other places have in progress. And so we're just following all those recommendations from the governor and the CDC. And part, like all of you right now, we're under that 10-person limit. So our council, which has 15 people, is meeting virtually, and a lot of them don't like that. And so I actually am saving a lot of time and gas money and having meetings right here on Zoom. So I'm hoping some of that continues, actually.
Mayor and Judge, what about you guys? Anything to add to that response?
Well, we're going to continue that as well, JD. As far as teleworking, we've done some of that in some of our departments back and forth, and that's worked out extraordinarily well. The citizens access to our website, and we've also set up a window access from the outer windows of the courthouse, so the clerk and the sheriff have been able to handle a lot of business by hand, but removed from the citizens. And that we're going to continue that for at least another 2 to 3 weeks, just because it's working so well, and we don't really need to bring more people in until we're totally ready. Our businesses here are dying to get back into business, and some are dying in spot because they're not in business until several of them, but they don't plan to reopen because they've lost too much, and they don't think that it's worth the risk of reopening. That's unfortunate, but we are one of the economic drivers of the Commonwealth, and it has hurt our economy drastically. And I want to correct or clarify something I said a minute ago. When I said we're not as dependent on occupational tax as the city of Lexington, let me just say, right across the street at City Hall, they have 60% of their revenue is occupational tax. So it affects our community adversely, a great deal. So the budgets are going to be reflective of that. Ours is just not going to be hurt quite as bad as the city of Bowling Green is because of our revenue structure. But we're already set up with all of our PPE for our different departments, and when we reopen everything, we're going to be prepared. Our parks department has probably seen the greatest closure, and that we've totally closed everything in the parks. Next week, we start reopening some of the green space in the parks and the disc golf courses and things like that. But we're also going to have people manning the parks and enforcing the rules. And we have a 7-stage reopening plan for our parks and recreation programs, which is going to be painful to the citizenry because they're ready to open everything up right now, but we're not.
Mayor, what about you?
Well, I was just thinking one small anecdote for the judge. If I'm not mistaken, I might have been an employee at one of his businesses when I was an undergrad, Midtown Cards, Judge. I don't know if that was yours or not, but
good to see you again. Yes, thank you.
I just put 2 and 2 together. You signed a paycheck or 2 of mine.
That's right.
It was a part-time job when I was at the Hilltopper, but they've covered a lot of it. JD, one thing that I would add is I think now as leaders, it's more important than ever that we talk about culture with our city workforce. We've been so blessed in Somerset that the businesses that are open and that have continued to do well, they've provided lunch for a department or my entire city workforce. And even though we're a small community, we're actually not a small municipality because of the services that we offer: water, sewer, gas, all the emergency services, parks, sanitation. We have 270 full-time employees, and it's almost every day somebody in the community is buying their lunch and doing something nice for my staff. And I think that if we can continue some of these things that have made us more efficient, one, that's going to help major problems throughout the state. One being pensions, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. But 2, creating positive culture in each community is only going to make the Commonwealth shine brighter. And I hope that through this, that sense of community grows, and that sense of togetherness and support for local business. Bowling Green made, Lexington made, Somerset made, Kentucky made, doesn't stop. And I know in my community, as folks are reopening, they're making a conscious decision to support those that are locally owned, and I'm really proud of that.
Mayor, before you have to run, I'm going to let you take a parting shot on this question, because we've talked a whole lot. City and county leaders, if you've been in tune at all, have talked a whole lot about the need for federal aid for local governments. How important is it to your community to receive aid from the federal government? I guess there's 2 lines of discussion on this that you might address, and everybody may address. One, some portion of the CARES funding formula that's already been given out to the state, and then some discussion about what's commonly referred to as revenue replacement. How important is that? And if not, are you looking at raising taxes?
Well, we would welcome funds. In my budget address, I noted that we were looking at $40 million downturn in revenues, and we're right now in Fayette County about 24.6% unemployment. In January, we were almost 3%. We have thousands of people not working here, and like other cities in Kentucky, we are 60 to 65% dependent in our budget on occupational license fees and net profit taxes. So we are way down. We get very little in property taxes. And so, and meanwhile, we are spending funds on COVID-related programs, equipment, et cetera, just like everybody else here. And so I would welcome any revenue. Early on in this, I sent a personal letter to every one of Kentucky's congressional delegates, including Fayette counties, but including all of those across the state, to Congress, and requested that they consider cities in their funding models. And I am not proposing a tax increase. I don't think this is the time for that. Too many people are hurting. I know that some members of my council are looking at that, and I just don't think it's a good time for that. We're losing revenue everywhere you turn around, whether it's our pools, they're now closed for the summer. The governor doesn't think they're going to be able to open pools till July or August. I mean, every single thing we're doing is pretty much losing money. So I am looking forward to some assistance, and we will be using it wisely, with a plan once we figure out what will be coming to Lexington.
Judge?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. If you have to run, we understand, and appreciate you being on the call.
Thank you so much, JD. I probably better run, and I just appreciate seeing all of you, and hope I get to your areas soon, and everybody stay safe and stay healthy, and thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
I agree with the mayor wholeheartedly, JD. Now's not the time to raise taxes on the people. This is the time for them to rebuild their businesses and help to rebuild our economy. And I think the last thing you want to do is put an additional tax burden on them at a time like this. This is a time when they need our continued support. Now I say that realizing that many of the counties are not going to be in quite as good a shape as Warren County is. We have a substantial rainy day fund that most counties are not lucky enough to have. But we intend to draw down on that rainy day fund because it's sure as hell raining.
Mayor?
Well, I'd just like to add that I think that the funding that does come to Kentucky, you, Jim, and others need a seat at the table on, we need to ensure that actually gets to the local economies and the local governments that so desperately need it. Somerset is blessed. I mean, I'd sure take it and we'd put it to good use, but, we're fortunate as well to have some reserves, and we're not really that dependent on occupational tax revenue because of the utilities that I mentioned. And so we're going to try to continue to be good stewards, but I just hope that the money gets into the hands of those that have been good stewards over the years, but also that need it the most.
Jim, why don't you address that a little bit? Some of the work we've been doing related to the CARES funding and of course, nationally on revenue replacement.
Yeah, I should add, and again, we've actually been having some really productive dialogue with the governor and his team on the first round, which is the CARES Act. And as you all know, the $1.7 billion that was given to Kentucky or assigned to Kentucky, that up to 45% of that is kind of the number nationally that you see referenced as what is potentially available to go to local governments. And in Kentucky, Jefferson County, Louisville, because of their population, received a direct allotment out of that, which is equivalent to like a 45% share. So that 45%, when you hear that, is again a national model that both JD and I, on behalf of our respective members, have asked for. And again, the governor's been very forthcoming in working with us on that, and we're real hopeful that we'll hear something about that very, very soon. And so that part, though, is primarily for the actual expenses that counties and cities have incurred. There's a little flexibility for some things that still are kind of around the edges, but it's not for revenue replacement, lost revenue. And that's why I think other efforts and that I know at least we've been involved in, kind of because my president, Judge Gary Moore from Boone County, is also incoming president of the National Association of Counties. And so I've been a little more privy to that discussion than I would otherwise in this role. And so there's a lot of national efforts to try to get more direct aid to counties. Now, unfortunately, and everybody on this call understands politics, you guys in local government, the politics of passing legislation in DC when, that's wrapped up in a big piece of legislation that has a lot of other things in it. It's yet to be seen, but we're certainly advocating if there is something passed that it have direct aid to counties and cities. And let me back up real quick, JD. One thing I did say earlier too, like Judge Buchanan, kind of thinking back on my words, is when I said that maybe rural counties weren't having as much of a budget impact initially, maybe because of their lack of dependency on payroll tax or something. I will say, since we are addressing primarily a business community audience today, that in the smaller counties, I've heard from a lot more county officials there about the real impact on small business. I know that, again, being my neighbor there, Judge Buchanan, a big economy there in Warren County in the region, a lot of big employers, large employers. But in small counties, it's the 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 person employer that they've been really frustrated, and rightfully so. That and I don't think this was ever the intended consequences of decision makers, but we've kept some stores open. We've kind of funneled everybody into those stores. It's been hard to maintain the much wanted social distancing there, and yet you've got some small businesses who have been unable to open. I've heard a lot of that, especially from our smaller counties, where the lifeblood of those economies really are small business.
Yeah, that's spot on.
I hear it here.
That's unanimous agreement on that. Since we're talking a little bit about the potential, of course, Jim alluded to the $3 trillion package that the congressional Democrats introduced yesterday, called the HEROES Act, that would definitely even more than replace revenue in some cases. I'm sure that's working its way through the process, but we certainly, what we're hearing at the league from cities across the state is that we have more of a revenue problem than perhaps an expenditure problem. At this point, we certainly can use that CARES funding, and will use the CARES funding. We've incurred a lot of expenses, but at the same time, the bigger fiscal impact is going to be the loss of revenue. And so we're working hard along with CAECO and our respective national associations to get some reasonable replacement for revenue, to get just in response to the government's response to the pandemic, the economic impact caused by that, not to correct past errors. We both, Jim and I both had some discussions with Majority Leader McConnell and our membership. One of the things that he has emphasized as being very important that we agree with wholeheartly is the need for some liability limitations. And I know that's an interest for the business community that's on the call. Cities and counties are in the same boat. There's no insurance in the marketplace, honestly, really to provide coverage. And so as litigation maybe winds up on this, it's the taxpayers who are in the direct line of sight, and city and county general funds. But why don't we talk a little bit about that need for liability protection, because that will ramp up. That discussion nationally is going to ramp up in the next couple of weeks for sure. Jim Buchanan, yeah.
Okay, all right. What I think that's something that we are advocating for, and I have with all of our congressional delegation that I've spoken with, and all of their staff. That is something I've said for weeks now. It seems like years, but for weeks now I've said there are only going to be a few winners in this entire thing. Small business is not going to be a winner. Large business and manufacturing are not going to be winners. It's going to be the big box stores that have been delegated or designated as essential. They're going to be big winners, and the other big winners are going to be the attorneys. And that's unfortunate, but that's just the way the world works. And if the federal government can give us some coverage for trying to do the things that we know to be in the best interest of the public, then that would be very beneficial to us, because I can see lot of liability cases coming along, not only for local governments and state governments, but also for businesses. You're afraid to make the wrong decision if you're in business and someone gets sick. Is it your fault? I think it's going to be something that's going to be litigated for a long, long time. And I'd like to not be a part of it.
Jim or Mayor, y'all want to comment on that or move along?
I'm happy to briefly. I would just say that as we reopen, I think that conversation needs to be expedited. Folks are so ready to get back to work, and Mayor Gorton alluded to it. One of the most, I say progressive in the sense, not in the political term, but in economic terms and of growth, is Lexington over 25%. Kentucky now leads America in unemployment, and that's the wrong thing to be leading in. We've got to have some pretty quick solutions to these things, or again, the damage is not months; it'll be years or decades.
I would just echo everything that's been said, and realizing again that this is an audience of primarily business folk listening in. It is about local government. Both you, JD, and I, through our respective associations, insure most of the counties and cities in the state. And so not only from just the pragmatic side of our business community, but also from the association side for our counties and cities, it's incredibly important to make sure that Judge Buchanan and Mayor Keck and every other county official who makes a good decision based on good information, trying to do the right thing, isn't liable for something that they couldn't have even imagined that they were doing wrong. And so this liability protection or this tort reform, or whatever the terminology is that's being discussed in DC, a lot of folks call it a lot of different things, but we certainly need to have protection, immunity protection for counties, cities, small business, large business, who are all trying to do the right thing. I think that's what Leader McConnell has said. It's not about people who do grossly negligent things. That, of course, that's what the protections are for. But for those who are just trying to do the right thing, the last thing they need to worry about is getting sued over it. Counties or cities or business.
Agree wholeheartedly. I think everybody admits, all the local government leaders I've talked to have said, we all have learned, everybody, business owners, local government leaders, have learned a lot in response to a pandemic. Most leaders said, hey, I never envisioned seeing myself sitting in this chair having to respond to something like this. What's been your biggest frustration with this so far? In terms of managing your local government, what's been your greatest source of frustration?
The greatest source of frustration to me has just been the unknown. The fact that as you move along, everything is changing as we go, and the fact that some people are so scared that they want you to close everything down and keep everyone at home for the next 6 months. And then in other groups, and most people, factually today, they just want to get back to their lives. They want to do the right things, but they want to do the right things while they're living their lives. And people need to get back to their lives, and we need them to all get back to work and help to rebuild our economy, which is at the weakest state that I can imagine.
Mayor?
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of that, and I'm going to do my very best to be diplomatic. It's challenging when you're elected to lead a community. In my case, it's a city, and you have a sworn duty to the people of Somerset or a county, and you're not really allowed to do your job. That sworn duty is certainly to protect them, but also to provide opportunity and create an environment for people to thrive and to be successful. And in many ways, when you feel like that, those decisions are taken from you, and you're unsure that if your voice is heard or the collective voice of leaders like myself is heard, it's a challenge because we do, I think, local government, government closest to its people is best. And in large ways right now, our voice means the least. And so I appreciate opportunities like this to speak candidly and to present plans and opportunities to, just as Judge Buchanan said, get folks back to work. They want to do it safely. They want to do it responsibly, but they want to live their lives. And, so it's been a great frustration for me that in some ways, I don't think we're changing the play. You don't run a 10-yard out route every play. Eventually it's going to get picked off. And I think some of the measures that we initiated early were prudent and wise and very effective. But now it's time to do something a little different. And it's been frustrating, again, to be candid, that hadn't been able to happen as quickly as I would like it.
Jim, you want to comment on that, what you're hearing from the county?
Yeah, I mean, much of the same. And I think what's important for, again, the folks who are tuned into this webinar might not know this. I mean, Judge Buchanan is a 25-year county judge. My president, Judge Moore, is in his 6th term as county judge. And there's a few others out there that have served that long. I got to serve alongside Mike for almost 20 years. When you hear people who've been around this thing that long talking about how this is a test of leadership, a test of their know-how, a test of how they've been able to even function, imagine this: half of the county officials in the state today have now been serving for less than 18 months. I mean, we had a near 50% turnover among county judge executives in this state. And Mayor, I know a lot of cities in the same situation. So I think the frustration that is out there is just as Judge Buchanan said, it's the unknown. And it's unknown whether you've been doing this for 2 decades or whether you've been doing this for less than 2 years. And so, I think the one thing that's important that I hear from counties primarily is that I don't think anybody's blaming anybody, because I think nobody knows. This is uncharted territory. It's confusing. It's frustrating for county officials, city officials, but it's because nobody knows what the right answer is. And you hear different information at times that, 2 very solid sources and we get the calls, and I know JD, you're getting those calls from county officials who are saying, what should I do? What's your all's recommendation? And we're very cautious about it because sometimes we just simply don't know what the answer is either. And so I guess misery loves company in this, but I do appreciate so much, I think, on behalf of our counties, what has been done to this point. As the mayor said, the decisions that were made early, I think have absolutely kept Kentucky from seeing some of the outbreaks that other states saw, but we've got to be real careful. And I think Judge Buchanan said this on a KET interview we did together last week. The only thing worse than not opening back up soon enough may be to open so soon and unprepared that you have to go backwards. I mean, I think, Judge, you said you only get to do this one time, right? And so for our counties and cities facing those kind of decisions, this is a heavy burden for county and city leaders right now, heavy.
How has the pandemic impacted government services? Are there additional discussions about consolidation of services or streamlining services as a result of this in your communities, or have you heard any talk about that during the pandemic?
We haven't heard any talk about it during the pandemic. Certainly, since we've been in this common fight, we're working together, and we're particularly on testing and other initiatives, we're working together on a daily basis. But as far as Bowling Green and Warren County are concerned, we've always worked well together. Certainly consolidation is something that is revisited from time to time, but we haven't had time to think about anything except the response to this COVID-19 outbreak around the world, and how to respond to it in our little corner of the world.
Well, I think that similar in Somerset, of course, with Judge there and Bowling Green and Warren County in a lot of ways have been the model of what collaboration looks like. That's how you get the record growth they've had. That's how you get the economic development that they have. It's easy and sort of, I say, politically lazy say, well, they're on interstate and they've got a university. Well, that's the case with a lot of communities, and Bowling Green has absolutely flourished. For us, I do think it's enhanced our communication with the county. I think that I'd love to brag on Steve Kelly and his team. They've really stepped up. They launched an emergency operations center, the EOC, and so the dialogue between RPD and the sheriff's office, our emergency response folks and public safety folks is better. And again, those are some of the things that I hope that we'll carry with us, that will continue when we get on the other side of this and allow us to be a little bit leaner, maybe to streamline, as JD mentioned, probably not consolidate per se, but definitely get more done and hopefully with less in time.
How about your responses to we mentioned the fact that a lot of our employees, city and county governments, are on the front lines, and risk exposure, probably second or third only to the health industry workers who are on the front lines. But do y'all have plans if you get, say for example, your police department or sheriff's department gets an infection? We had a whole city, a police department early on in quarantine along with the mayor here in Kentucky because of a positive test. Do y'all have plans ready to go in the event that your workforce becomes immobilized like that?
We do indeed, and so far we, knock on wood, haven't had any problems like that. But we have had to send people home if they were feeling bad. And when they come in the morning, if they're feeling bad or if they have a fever, we instruct them to go home. And some of them have been tested, and luckily they've all turned out to be negative. But we have a different protocol in the sheriff's department than we do in the parks, but it's all similar in nature. We're all reacting to it a little bit. We're all doing the same things, but we're doing them a little bit differently. We have touchless thermometers in every area, and we're looking at automatic, I guess what you would call them is temperature readers at entrance doors for the courthouse, so that we can actually monitor who's showing up as potentially sick. But so far, we've been lucky.
Yeah, we've been real fortunate too, JD. We've had a couple scares where folks thought they had it and had been exposed, but we've been blessed that our local high school, which of course has a kitchen and lots of space, has offered up facilities should we end up with a larger quarantine. Local hotels have offered full floors of their hotel, again, should that be the case. And so it's a great opportunity for me to brag on the people of Somerset who have rallied and given us quick options really before we had to ask. And that's been a blessing. I'll knock on wood like Judge did, though. I'm just hoping we avoid it. With us running sanitation, that's a big concern because they really are. Their direct exposure is consistent and daily, but they've done a great job. And we're hopeful that we can continue to avoid it. But should we run into cases, we'll be ready.
Joel Hopper, I'm just now seeing these questions in the chat panel. Thanks, Jim, for reminding me to look at that. Joel Hopper asked, how many non-essential workers from your respective city or county have been furloughed? Anybody done any furloughs?
No, none.
I have 5. We furloughed 4 from parks, and then we had 1 from another department. It was necessary, but it was also communicated that those folks were were willing, which was nice. It didn't have to be contentious, but we've most of what we do is essential. It's hard, people they're not okay if their trash doesn't get picked up or if they call the police or EMS and they don't show. So we've done some staff rotations, a lot of teleworking, folks working from home. In our natural gas department, we kind of created teams and shifts where they didn't have to be as exposed to their entire crew, but only 5 furlough.
Mayor Bonnie Jung from Douglas Hills typed a question.
Mayor.
And she asked Mayor Gorton, of course, answer this question. What are you doing about your swimming pools?
Well, it's unique for us. I'll start. We've got our public water park that the city owns, and so I'm holding out hope. I know that the governor has announced it's unlikely to see anything in June, but fingers crossed that July is viable, and pending what they do with school, maybe we'll get a few weeks of the month of August. I think that the children of our community need that, and maybe that sounds like a privileged statement, but for many of them, it's one of the few sources of entertainment that they get. And so I really hope that we have the ability to do so.
Yeah,
Hey, JD, let me jump in real quick, because on that question about unemployment, or rather furloughs, I think I might could just share, because I know Judge Buchanan and Mayor Keck are from areas where you might have the technology and ability to have continued to do a lot of telework, even for those that might be considered non-essential, as far as, not the emergency responders or first responders. But I will say across the state, in a lot of our counties at least, and I don't know about the cities, but I can assume this is true, that in many of the smaller counties especially, they have sent some folks home. We actually manage an unemployment insurance pool for counties, and most of our counties are in that. And we've seen that in direct, we've seen the activity directly here. But so we understand that and a lot of other ancillary county, quasi-county entities that purchase their unemployment insurance through CAECO. So that's 4, 5, 6-fold in terms of activity that we've seen in unemployment insurance claims that have been made. So those are absolutely people that are working for counties or quasi-county agencies. So many places have furloughed or reduced their folks at levels that they could. Again, police and fire and EMS and jail, there's not much option there. But for those who they have in many cases. So.
Yeah, I think we've seen the same thing. It depends on the local government that you ask, but there's definitely been a lot of that. It's difficult when you look at the workforce of city and county governments. You got utility operators, public works people, and police and fire that you need the most right now during a health pandemic. And so, it's tough to whittle that workforce, and it puts local governments in a further bind, I'll say, because on average about 60 to either anywhere from 60 to 80% of a city or county government's budget's human resources. It's public, it's human resource costs. And so in terms of being able to balance the budget, that furlough tool or unemployment layoff, job elimination, a lot of attrition, Joel, that we're seeing with retirements or unfilled positions, maybe even more so than furloughs. But those tools will escalate as we go along, and you start getting your anticipated fourth quarter receipts, and you go into the next budget year, largely depending on what happens with the federal government's response. Well, I have a couple minutes. Rather than asking another particular question, why don't I let you guys make a closing statement, something that you wish that was asked that maybe I didn't quite get to. Judge?
I'm not sure that there's anything particular, but I would like to say that at this point, I want to assure everyone that we're looking after their health, safety, and welfare, and certainly their from COVID-19 exposures. And we're going to continue to monitor their health care. But right now, we're focusing on balancing the restoring the local economy and helping individual businesses get back into business and going on with their lives. Too many people have expressed to me the dire need to get back to work. And I think that even though we have had a couple of deaths here in Warren County, and certainly a number of exposures and positive cases, we have just as great a likelihood of hardships, death, and financial ruin that could end up being more meaningful to the people of Warren County than the risk of staying than the risk of COVID-19. In other words, and you've seen this in other areas of Kentucky, when big employers close down, you see suicides, you certainly see emotional distress. And we've really put all of our churches to work, counseling our citizenry. Everyone who will admit it has had some emotional sensitivities and anxious desperation in their situation since we've closed all the businesses here. So we're in a hurry to get them back open, but we're in a hurry to get them back open safely and carefully.
Your last word before Travis takes over and kicks us all off.
Sure. No, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this, especially with the judge and Mayor Gorton and then, the leaders of cities and counties across Kentucky. I would just say that, decisions come with risk. And I understand there's consequences of action, but I think we also have to be equally aware that there's consequences of inaction. I'm asked daily about childcare. I think that's something we didn't touch on yet, but about work reentry, it's unquestionably critical that we address that. And I think we do so sooner than June the 15th. And so in Somerset, we're launching a task force with all of our local daycare and childcare owners. We want to mimic a lot of the guidelines offered from the state for those that are allowed to open that are hosting healthcare workers' children and frontline workers' children. And so I think that discussion is going to take some real courage. But we want to do that. We want to lead in that and make sure that, Kentucky's no longer at the top of the list in America in unemployment. And I hope others will join me in that fight and in that opportunity.
Jim, you want to say anything? Or Travis, you ready to go? Well, I thank you for the chance to moderate this again. It's a distinguished panel. It was good to see your all's faces as well doing this, and keep an eye on KCO and KLC. Contrary to what a lot of people think, we are working very much hand in hand in terms of protecting our local government officials. I appreciate, Jim, I'll say that publicly, the level of communications that we've had and being able to go on and deal with these issues together in a unified front. That's certainly been refreshing.
Yep. And I'll on behalf of the Kentucky Chamber, thank you all for participating today. That was a great discussion. This has been part of the Restart Kentucky webinar series sponsored by the Chamber and KCTCS. It's going to be recorded on our website, just like previous webinars. So be sure to feel free to check those out. And again, I want to thank our panelists. Just a great job and some excellent insight. With that, we'll go ahead and close this webinar out. Thank you everyone that logged on to join us. Hope everyone has a great afternoon. We've got another webinar tomorrow about tourism. Feel free to go to our website to get registered for that. Have a great afternoon and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a blessed week.
Thank you.